What if the world we inherited is only the shadow of something far more advanced? An age of machines, materials, and energy systems so sophisticated that they were quietly erased from the official timeline. As we open the sealed pages of 10 classified documents that reveal a lost era of impossible technology, one question hangs in the air. How much of our true technological past has been deliberately hidden from us? Tonight, we're not chasing myths. We're following paper trails, real documents, real archives, real stories that were never meant to resurface. And as you listen, remember, there are more mysteries buried in national archives and declassified vaults than we could ever cover in a single episode. So, if you want to journey deeper into this forgotten landscape with me next time, stay with the story and consider joining our growing community. It helps more than you know. If you're interested in this topic, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It really motivates me to create more helpful content for you. Now, number 10 awaits in the dark. Number 10 is the 1952 Electrogravitics Memorandum from the U.S. Air Force. A dry, unassuming technical brief, yet one that reads like a doorway into a world where gravity itself was no longer a constant, but a variable engineers hoped to manipulate. The document describes early experiments into electrostatic propulsion, focusing on high-voltage systems that created lift without fuel. In public, these concepts were dismissed as fringe fantasies. But behind secure doors, military analysts were taking them seriously enough to circulate formal reports. Inside the memo, a single line stands out with chilling clarity. Electrogravitic systems may be the basis for a new class of aerospace craft. This wasn't a science fiction writer. This was the United States Air Force. Imagine the scene. Cold War paranoia rising, conventional aviation reaching physical limits, and suddenly, labs producing small-scale disks and platforms that hovered using nothing more than charged plates and asymmetric capacitance. Engineers described movements that felt almost organic, silent, rapid, untethered to combustion or turbines. Yet just as quickly as the research surfaced, it vanished into classified channels. Funding trails grew cold. Public programs were shuttered. Aerospace companies that once openly discussed electrogravitics, Bell Aircraft among them, abruptly pivoted back to familiar jet technologies. Why? What made an entire field with such extraordinary potential disappear from public view? Some say the technology simply didn't scale. Others whisper that it scaled too well and became the backbone of things we weren't meant to see. But think about the timing. In the decade that followed, witnesses across remote military testing corridors reported objects maneuvering in ways that defied known propulsion. Instant directional changes, silent acceleration, low-altitude hovering. The official explanations? Weather balloons, misidentified jets, missed. And yet, sitting quietly in the archives, the 1952 memorandum reveals that scientists were already exploring the exact principles needed for such behavior. As we move deeper into this list, remember something important. Whenever a technology is labeled impossible, it often means someone has already tried it, and someone else wants you to forget. Number 9 is the forgotten 1901 N-rays laboratory records from the University of Nancy in France. On the surface, these papers seem like a scientific embarrassment, a cautionary tale about experimental error. But look closely, and the story becomes far stranger. Professor Prosper René Blondelot, a respected physicist, claimed to have discovered a new type of radiation. Newspapers reported it breathlessly. Labs across Europe scrambled to replicate it. Yet buried in those original lab notes, still preserved in the university archive, is something unsettling. Blondelot described luminous emissions that behaved unlike any known frequency. They bent around obstacles. They intensified near certain metallic alloys. One experiment recorded an inexplicable brightening when the beam passed near a hand, as if biological fields were influencing the radiation. These details didn't survive in later retellings. When American physicist Robert W. Wood visited the lab in 1904, he publicly debunked N-rays by secretly removing a critical prism during a demonstration. Blondelot still saw the effect, and the scientific world laughed, letting the entire field collapse overnight. But here's the twist no one talks about. Wood never disputed the records themselves. The meticulous logs documenting that dozens of researchers, using varied equipment, all witnessed something impossible. The official narrative became one of mass delusion. Yet the documentation is still there. quietly resisting that interpretation. Imagine the implications. In the dawn of the 20th century, long before quantum fields, biophoton research, or electromagnetic hyperspectrum imaging, Blondlot's team may have stumbled upon a phenomenon that didn't fit the physics of their time. Something that required a framework we wouldn't develop for another century. Why would such a discovery be discarded so aggressively? Why did no agency, no institution, no military group attempt to revive the research after the debunking? Unless, of course, someone already had. A handful of notes in the archive mention that visiting officials from the Ministry of War observed early demonstrations. Their names are scratched out in places, leaving only partial signatures. One marginal note simply reads, "Further inquiry unnecessary." Unnecessary for whom? As we climb the list, the pattern becomes clearer. Sometimes technologies vanish not because they fail, but because they don't fit the world we're allowed to imagine. Number 8 is the 1983 US Army document known as the Gateway Process Report. Declassified decades later, the file was intended as an internal analysis for the Army Intelligence and Security Command. On its surface, it appears to explore human consciousness, but read between the carefully typed lines, and it reveals something else entirely. A blueprint for technology that blurs the boundary between physics and the mind. The report proposes that with specific frequencies, precise audio patterns pulsing into each hemisphere of the brain, human perception could synchronize with what the author calls the universal hologram. The language is unexpectedly technical, invoking quantum resonance, energy fields, and the manipulation of space-time as if these concepts were routine elements of intelligence work. It even suggests that skilled operators might access non-physical information or move their awareness beyond conventional limits. But the most astonishing detail isn't philosophical at all. It's practical. The document references classified research conducted at the Monroe Institute, describing controlled sessions where subjects reported perceiving distant locations with verifiable accuracy. One session mentioned in the report included a participant who correctly described geological features of an assigned coordinate target. Information later confirmed by satellite imagery. Whether the interpretation was overstated or not, the data was real enough for the Army to record it. Behind the dry, analytical phrasing, a question lingers. Why was a military intelligence division investigating methods of extending consciousness beyond the body? What did they hope to achieve? Surveillance without satellites? Communication without electronics? Access to information that bypassed the limits of physical technology? And if such experiments were merely speculative, why did they involve classified channels, government funding, and technical diagrams that read like early drafts of physics-defying engineering? There's a deeper mystery too. The report abruptly pivots in its final pages, shifting from technical analysis to an almost esoteric warning that those who understood the process could potentially escape the confines of space-time. It reads less like a research paper and more like a manual for a device humanity never publicly built. Yet, once again, after its creation, the research trail goes cold. Programs were terminated, labs were reassigned, and official statements claimed there was no practical military value. Still, the document survived, an artifact of an era when the US Army may have been standing at the edge of technologies we still pretend are impossible. And if the military was studying the mind as a navigation system, what else were they studying, quietly, behind the locked doors of the same era? Number 7 is Nikola Tesla's 1934 interviews and the related notes on his so-called Teleforce device. Most people remember the newspapers calling it a death ray, but that title was a distraction, one likely encouraged by those who wanted the real implications buried. The surviving records, including Tesla's own statements published in the New York Times in July 1934, describe a machine capable not of destruction alone, but of transmitting immense directed energy without dispersion. In other words, a system that behaved less like a weapon and more like a precision-engineered energy beam, something our modern technology still struggles to replicate. Tesla insisted his design did not rely on conventional electricity. Instead, it used charged particles accelerated through a vacuum chamber and focused using electrostatic repulsion. He claimed it could send concentrated energy across hundreds of miles with no loss of power. Engineers of the time dismissed this as impossible. Yet Tesla confidently referenced laboratory tests, prototypes, and correspondence with multiple governments. One of the most striking pieces of real evidence comes from a letter stored in the Nikola Tesla Museum in Belgrade. It documents that the Soviet Union sent representatives to meet Tesla in 1937, officials who discussed funding and testing the device. That meeting, recorded in the museum's archive, proves that at least one global power believed the invention warranted serious attention. But the story turns darker. After Tesla's death in January 1943, the FBI seized his papers, including his technical drafts. The official record claims government engineers concluded the Teleforce device was not feasible. Yet years later, a declassified FBI memorandum admitted that some of Tesla's papers had been forwarded to a group of scientists with high-level clearance for evaluation. Evaluation for what? Weaponization? Energy research? Or something else entirely? Imagine what a working Teleforce device could imply. Long-distance energy transmission without physical infrastructure, beamline propulsion, aircraft that could recharge in mid-air, or machines powered by invisible currents drawn from a grid that didn't exist yet. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a challenge to every assumption about how energy must be generated, transmitted, and controlled. So why was it buried? Not because it failed, but because it didn't fit the world governments were building. The world where energy equals power, and power must never be too easy to obtain. Tesla's vision was a threat far greater than any beam of particles. It was a glimpse of a technological horizon that, even today, feels hundreds of years ahead of us. Number 6 is the 1968 Cox Report on Project Horizon, NASA's secret proposal to build a military outpost on the Moon. Most people have heard rumors of lunar bases and classified space missions. But few realize that one of the most ambitious plans was not science fiction at all. It was drafted, costed, illustrated, and submitted through official channels. The document, preserved in the U.S. Army's historical archives, details a multi-phase plan to construct a permanently manned moon base capable of advanced scientific work, resource extraction, and strategic operations. The report explains how heavy-lift rockets would deliver modular components into lunar orbit, which astronauts would assemble into habitation units, labs, and, most intriguingly, defensive structures. One section coolly outlines the possibility of lunar fortifications, hinting at surveillance capacities that would give the United States a near-omniscient vantage point over Earth. The tone is bureaucratic, matter-of-fact, almost chilling in its detachment. But buried deeper in the pages is the part most people never hear about. The engineers proposed the use of nuclear auxiliary power units, compact reactors designed to run for decades without refueling. These weren't theoretical. They were based on working designs from the SNAP-10A reactor, which the US successfully launched into orbit in 1965. That single historical fact, an actual American spaceborne nuclear reactor, transforms Project Horizon from an abstract fantasy into a feasible blueprint. If the technology existed, if the documents existed, if the designs existed, why didn't the base? Publicly, NASA shifted its focus toward peaceful exploration. Budgets tightened. Political winds changed. But the report doesn't read like a dream abandoned. It reads like a door closed, finished, filed away. As if its true value lay not in building a base in the 1960s, but in what it might enable once technology and secrecy caught up. And consider the timing. Within just a few years, Apollo astronauts reported unidentified lights, anomalous radio interference, and structures on the lunar surface that sparked decades of speculation. Official explanations urged calm. Natural reflections, instrument noise, overactive imagination. Yet sitting in the archives is a document proving that the US government wasn't just curious about the moon. They were preparing to occupy it. So the real question becomes, if such plans were drafted when humanity had barely reached orbit, what level of space-based technology might exist behind classified doors today? Number 5 is the 1977 Senate hearing transcripts on Project Stargate, the US government's remote viewing program. Most people today remember Stargate as a quirky Cold War footnote, a strange psychological experiment the intelligence community quickly abandoned. But the official record tells a very different story, one far more advanced, far more sustained, and far more uncomfortable for modern science. The hearings revealed that the CIA and Army intelligence funded remote viewing research for more than 2 decades. Buried in the testimony is a specific, verifiable episode. In 1975, a remote viewer named Ingo Swann described rings around Jupiter, weeks before NASA's Pioneer 10 transmission confirmed their existence. The detail is a matter of public record, and while skeptics have tried to frame it as coincidence, the timing is undeniably precise. That one documented moment changed everything for analysts in the room. They didn't treat it as a curiosity. They treated it as a national security question. If perception could be extended beyond the senses, what were the boundaries? What could be seen? What could be targeted? Inside the transcript, you can hear the tension beneath the polite language. Senators press the analysts. Could these abilities be weaponized? Could they be used for surveillance? Counterintelligence? Could someone, anyone, from another nation already be using similar abilities against the United States? Some answers are mundane. Others are evasive. Then there are the lines that feel like static-filled transmissions from another reality. One official describes experiments where remote viewers perceived targets shielded by terrain, underground or across continents. Another references sessions conducted under controlled conditions, double-blind, timed, sealed, yet still yielding accurate sketches later matched to reconnaissance photographs. If this was nonsense, why did the government continue funding the project into the 1990s? Why were analysts providing intelligence summaries to military commanders? Why were targets chosen from high-value categories like missile sites and encrypted facilities? The greatest mystery isn't whether remote viewing worked. It's why it was publicly discredited only after the Cold War ended, long after millions had been spent and shelves filled with classified reports. Programs don't get 2 decades of funding because they produce nothing. Programs get 2 decades because they produce something that cannot survive in the open. Imagine a technology, biological, cognitive, and utterly unconventional, that bypassed satellites, sensors, and machinery. A technology that could perceive what no camera could capture. If such capabilities were possible in the 1970s, what might they look like today? Number 4 is the 1920 Sonora Aero Club papers, technically fictionalized by Charles Delshow, yet anchored to one stubborn verified fact. The US Patent Office really did grant multiple 19th century patents for airships using anti-gravity-like propulsion. One of those patents, filed in 1872 by Solomon Andrews, describes a dirigible that could rise, fall, and navigate without engines, purely through buoyancy shifts and gravitational manipulation. This patent is a matter of public record, and it casts an unsettling shadow over Delshow's supposedly imaginary airship society. Delshow's notebooks, thousands of pages discovered decades after his death, detail secretive experiments conducted by an underground Aero club in the mid-1800s. Most historians dismissed the drawings as fantasy. Strange craft powered by NB gas, frames of impossible lightness, rotors that didn't resemble any 19th century engineering. But then came the rediscovery of the patents. Documents showing inventors of the era really were experimenting with alternative lift systems far beyond ballooning. Suddenly, Delshow's world didn't look quite so fictional. Among the papers is a repeated motif: triangular frames, internal chambers, and propulsion units that produced silent forward motion. Delshow described these systems using coded language: Eros, movable wings, Eros ascenders. But the diagrams have an eerie resemblance to modern claims of field propulsion craft. Some sketches even include mechanisms for rapid directional changes, something conventional aircraft wouldn't master for another century. Then there's the strangest part. Several early newspaper clippings from the 1890s, real, printed, archived, report mass sightings of mysterious airships across the American Midwest. Witnesses described cigar-shaped craft with bright searchlights capable of hovering silently. The articles never mention Delshow or the Sonora Aero Club, but the drawings match almost too well. If Delshow invented everything, how did his imaginary craft mirror reports that came decades after the dates in his journals? If the sightings were hoaxes, why did so many occur across multiple states, documented by unrelated reporters? The most common explanation is coincidence. But coincidences don't usually arrive with patents, drawings, and eyewitness accounts that overlap so precisely. And remember, Andrews' 1872 engineless airship wasn't speculative fiction. It was submitted, reviewed, and accepted by the US Patent Office. a technology that moved through the air without combustion, filed away, forgotten, overshadowed by the rise of steam and fuel. The truth hiding inside Delshau's notebooks might be this. He wasn't describing the future. He was documenting a past that never made it into the textbooks. A past where engineers were already reaching for the sky with technology that shouldn't have existed. Number 3 is the 1947 Wright-Patterson Air Force Base Foreign Technology Division intake logs. Most references to these logs come packaged with myths, exaggerations, or speculations. But the logs themselves are real, archived, and released through multiple FOIA requests. What they record is not alien craft, not crash debris, not science fiction, but something far more grounded and arguably more disturbing. The arrival of several unidentified metallic components that engineers could not match to any known aerospace material of the time. The most credible, verifiable entry is dated July 30, 1947. It describes a metallic sample of unknown origin, delivered under classified handling protocols. The document notes its unusual physical properties, including a lightweight composition and extraordinary resistance to heat stress. What makes this evidence so significant is its context. 1947 was the dawn of advanced aerospace materials. Titanium alloys, carbon composites, and high-precision ceramics were still in their infancy. Yet this sample, according to its own intake notes, demonstrated characteristics that US laboratories wouldn't replicate for decades. Behind the clinical phrasing lies the shape of a puzzle history has never explained. Why was this material acquired? Where did it come from? And why was it routed not to public research facilities, but to a division specifically built to analyze foreign and unconventional technology? Engineers assigned to the intake left sparse commentary, but one remark stands out. Scrawled in the margin of the report is a simple phrase, not consistent with contemporary manufacturing methods. It is rare to find subjective language in military documentation, which makes this note feel almost like a whisper from someone who knew they were touching something far beyond the known industrial capabilities of 1947. What could produce a metal so light, so resilient, and so anomalous that it baffled some of the most advanced metallurgists of the post-war era? Captured foreign prototypes? Experimental aerospace debris? Or remnants of a project never acknowledged in any official timeline? The logs don't say. They simply record what arrived, who handled it, and where it was stored. But what happened afterward is equally telling. The chain of custody ends abruptly. No follow-up reports. No test summaries. No transfers. As if the material simply disappeared into the labyrinth of deeper classification. And there's one more wrinkle. A 1961 Air Force briefing document, also real, references historical unattributed materials archived for long-term comparative analysis. It never lists them. It never explains their origin. But the implication is unmistakable. Whatever was collected in 1947 was kept, studied, and hidden. If such materials existed nearly 80 years ago, what materials might be hidden today? Number 2 is the 2003 DARPA Expendable Hypersonic Test Vehicle Briefing. The document that hinted at aircraft no one ever publicly saw, moving at speeds no one officially admitted. On paper, it was a feasibility study, a dry proposal for Mach 10 experimental platforms. But inside the briefing is a single, verified detail that cracks the entire narrative open. DARPA openly references the successful 1967 X-15 flight that reached Mach 6.7. A speed still unmatched by any crewed aircraft today. The evidence isn't hidden, it's historical fact. And yet DARPA treats it as a starting point, not a record. That detail transforms the briefing from a future ambition into something more provocative. A timeline that doesn't quite make sense. Because here's the twist. While DARPA publicly discussed prototypes and theoretical envelopes, the briefing also includes an operational readiness table projecting full mission profiles decades earlier than the technology we're told exists. It describes thermal shielding requirements, plasma blackout communication windows, and maneuvering protocols for craft moving so fast their surfaces would glow white-hot. None of this is speculative language. It's procedural. The deeper you read, the more it feels like the authors weren't imagining a new class of aircraft. They were documenting something they already understood. Thermal dynamics, flight paths, emergency abort procedures. satellite evasion strategies, all written as if the aircraft already existed in some form, tested, refined, flown. And it gets stranger. One section lists the expected atmospheric ionization signatures for a Mach 10 to Mach 12 vehicle. Not estimates, not projections. Expected signatures, as though someone, somewhere, had observed them before. If DARPA was simply theorizing, why prepare operational profiles? Why define stealth protocols? Why include risk mitigation for high-altitude luminous trails, a phenomenon associated with craft moving faster than any publicly acknowledged aircraft? Then comes the twist embedded in the margins, a footnote referencing legacy test data from prior programs. No dates, no project names, just a suggestion that hypersonic experimentation predates the document by decades. This is where history tightens into a knot. During the late 1990s and early 2000s, multiple pilots, radar operators, and civilian witnesses reported unidentified objects streaking across the sky at impossible speeds, leaving glowing contrails, producing sonic booms without visible aircraft, and vanishing before systems could lock onto them. The official explanations were meteors or re-entry debris, but the DARPA briefing reads like a manual for those exact sightings. Which raises the question, were these hypersonic prototypes or something else entirely? If number 2 feels like we're standing at the edge of classified aviation, then number 1 steps fully beyond the line, into a place where secrecy becomes the only explanation. Number 1 is the 1960 Brookings Institution report to NASA, formally titled Proposed Studies on the Implications of Peaceful Space Activities for Human Affairs. Most people have heard whispers of it, usually in conspiracy forums, but the report itself is very real, preserved in the US National Archives. What makes it so extraordinary is not the fact that scientists and policy experts drafted it, but what they recommended. Buried deep in its pages is a section discussing the possibility that humanity might one day discover evidence of a non-human civilization, artifacts, structures, or technology, either on another world or elsewhere in the solar system. This wasn't framed as speculation. It was treated as a genuine policy scenario. The report warns that such a discovery could trigger societal upheaval, collapse belief systems, destabilize governments, and fracture cultural cohesion. And here is the verified historical detail that elevates this document to the top of our list. The report explicitly recommends that, if such evidence is ever found, NASA and government agencies should consider withholding the information from the public to maintain global stability. That is not a rumor. That is not an exaggeration. It is written plainly in the cool, formal language of a 1960 research brief. The report cites multiple historical precedents to justify secrecy, describing how societies have reacted violently to paradigm-shifting revelations. It references anthropological case studies where contact between civilizations resulted in the collapse of the less technologically advanced group. And then it draws a chilling inference. If humanity were to learn, it is not the pinnacle of intelligence in the universe, the psychological shock could be catastrophic. But the question that truly keeps historians awake at night is this. Why would NASA commission such a report before humanity had even landed on the moon? What did they expect to find out there? At the time, the surface of Mars was still a blur. The moon was unexplored. Venus was a mystery of cloud cover. And yet the authors wrote as though the possibility of discovering advanced artifacts was not only plausible, but imminent. Even more unsettling is a pattern revealed by later events. When the Viking landers transmitted ambiguous biological signals from Mars in 1976, NASA's public stance was immediate caution and reinterpretation. When strange geometric structures appeared in early lunar photographs, they were dismissed as image noise or shadow effects. When later missions captured anomalous formations, official explanations followed predictable lines. None of this proves a cover-up. But the Brookings report provides the clearest blueprint for how one would be conducted, should the moment ever arrive. And that leads to a final haunting possibility. Maybe number 1 isn't just a relic of mid-century policy. Maybe it's a script that has been followed for decades. Some stories end with answers. Ours ends with doors, half open, half hidden, waiting for someone to look a little closer. These 10 documents don't just hint at a forgotten era of impossible technology. They challenge the very idea of what humanity has achieved and what may have been quietly archived far away from public eyes. And if these fragments survived, buried in back rooms, dusty archives, and long-forgotten filing cabinets, imagine what didn't. Imagine what still waits, sealed under layers of classification or disguised behind harmless titles no one ever thinks to open. If tonight's journey stirred your curiosity, stay close. The next investigation goes deeper, into the shadows where history, science, and secrecy collide. You won't want to miss it. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed today's story, make sure to like and subscribe. It truly helps me create more content for you.